Oh, okay. Thank you, Bridge House, for clarifying. Hi, everyone that's joining us. We're just going to give it a few minutes before we get started.
Hello, Common Ground. Welcome. Nice to see you all. For the clubhouses, it would be terrific if you could put every member's name in the chat that is joining us so we know who is participating. And for everyone else, please introduce yourself in the chat and who you're affiliated with, if it's a clubhouse or any other organization, that would be terrific. Thank you so much.
De todas las organizaciones, nos gustaría que pusieran los nombres de los participantes en el chat para poder verlos. Muchas gracias a todos por poner los nombres de la organización y de los participantes hoy.
So we're just going to give it a few more minutes and then we will get started to be respectful of all of your time.
Para todos los que están aquí, vamos a darles un minuto más a los que no han llegado porque queremos respetarle a todos el tiempo.
For those who are just joining us, if you could please put your name and if you're affiliated with a clubhouse or any other organization, please put that in the chat so we know that you're here with us. And welcome. We will get started in just a few moments.
Para aquellos que nos entraron hasta ahora, por favor, denos el nombre de la organización o con qué grupo están afiliados. Por favor, pónganlo en el chat para saber quiénes son. Muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros y comenzaremos en unos minutos.
Thank you guys for putting your names in the chat.
Gracias a todos por poner el nombre en el chat.
Okay. I'm going to start by just giving some instructions for anyone who wants to listen in Spanish. And please just wait until we're done with this slide to follow these instructions because I have to set it up after we're done with this slide.
Para aquellos que quieran escuchar esta presentación en español, voy a darles unas instrucciones para que puedan utilizarlo y empezaremos después de dar estas instrucciones.
Please find the globe in your menu bar, click Spanish, and then click Mute Original Audio.
Para interpretación en español, por favor, encuentre el globo de la parte inferior en su pantalla o en la barra de menú. Haga clic en español y después haga clic para silenciar el audio original.
And I will set that up shortly, so that option should be available to you. Please also do the same thing, but click English if you're listening in English. That just helps so that we can all communicate with each other better.
En unos momentos verán el globo apenas lo ponga y por favor para los que hablan inglés también deben seleccionar en el globo el lenguaje de inglés para que todos nos podamos comunicar mejor.
Okay, Juanita, I'm going to put you in the Spanish channel.
Thank you very much, Jordan.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, please make sure that you have chosen the correct channel, whether it be English or Spanish. And we'll be getting ready to start in just 1 minute.
Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan Fairchild, and I'm the coordinator and community organizer for Keep the Promise Coalition. Keep the Promise Coalition is a grassroots group of advocates with lived experience of mental health, substance use, and co-occurring disabilities. Before we get started today, I will read a land acknowledgement. If you're not familiar, a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Native peoples as traditional stewards of lands. The statement highlights the enduring relationship between Native peoples and their traditional territories. This land acknowledgement was provided by the University of Connecticut's Native American Cultural Programs. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We ask them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. Welcome to our webinar on voting and elections. Mental health is on the ballot. Today, we will cover the basic need-to-knows of voting, the basic rights and rights of people with disabilities when voting, and interacting with candidates for elected office. This training is made possible by grants from Hartford Foundation for Public Giving's Catalyst Endowment Fund, as well as grants from the Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities. I will be presenting today with my colleague, Holly Hackett. And Holly, I'll give it to you to introduce yourself and get us started.
Thank you, Jordan. Hi, everyone. I'm Holly Hackett. I am the office administrator here at Keep the Promise Coalition. And let's get started. So, the basics. Why vote? Voting is one way to make your voice heard. Every elected official in the United States has an influence on issues that you care about. Every vote counts. Sometimes elections come down to a small handful of votes. I've seen elections decided between 7 votes in Hamden alone. So voting could mean a ballot measure you want passing or a candidate that cares about your issue winning, which again happened in Hamden by 7 votes. Even if a candidate does not talk about mental health, your vote still matters. Maybe they're strong on housing issues or Medicaid. Many issues affect mental health, and your vote can make the difference.
And I just want to add to that as well, especially in these local races and races for state senate and state representative, it can really come down to just a few votes, as Holly said. It's very common in those cases. So it's important that we do vote. So before we get started, I just want to recommend to everyone that you make a plan to vote before election day. Why would you want to make a plan to vote? Well, as with almost anything else in life, it helps to have a plan. And you don't want to be scrambling on the day of the election just to find out that you're not registered to vote, or you don't know where your polling place is, or you don't know which candidates are on your ballot, or which way you'd like to vote on them. So answering a few of these questions beforehand can make things a lot easier on election day. So you'll want to make sure that you're registered to vote. If you're not, make sure that you get registered. You're going to want to find out where your polling place is. You're going to want to know what time of day you're going to vote. Know which candidates and ballot questions you're going to be voting on, and think about how you'd like to vote on each. And if you need accommodations to help you vote, it's good to know this ahead of time, and it's good to call your registrar of voters ahead of time as well. They're supposed to provide these accommodations for you regardless, but it's always a good idea to make sure that you call ahead. And finally, if you need an absentee ballot, it's a good idea to request that as soon as possible. These are all things that we're going to cover today.
So one of the most important things is, when is election day? This year, it is Tuesday, November the 8th, and the standard times for all polling locations is from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. What I had forgotten to mention when we very first got started is, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. You can feel free to do that, and we will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. Okay, thank you guys.
So first you have to find out if you're even eligible to vote. And these on the screen are the 3 questions that you need to be able to answer. 1, are you at least 17 years old and turning 18 years old on or before the day of the election? Like Holly just said, election day this year is November 8th. Second, are you a United States citizen living in Connecticut? Third, have you been convicted of a felony? And if you have you finished your time in prison and your parole? And for more information about that, you can click the link when we send out this presentation. But if you've answered yes to all 3 of these questions, then that means you're eligible to register to vote.
So make sure you register by 8 p.m. on November 1st, which is 7 days before the election. There are ways to register to vote in Connecticut. You can register online if you have a Department of Motor Vehicle or DMV state issued ID. That doesn't just have to be a driver's license, because some people don't drive, and it's just your regular picture ID from the state of Connecticut that you get from the Department of Motor Vehicle. And if when you get our slide presentation, you could just click on the link that we provided to do that. The second way is you can complete a voter registration form and bring it to your town's registrar of voters. And that form can be found by clicking on the link that we've provided. And again, please make sure you register by 8 p.m. November 1st, 7 days before the election.
You can also get voter registration forms from a lot of places in Connecticut. So I'm just going to read off the list of different places you can get them from. You can get them from your town clerk's office, the Department of Social Services, also known as DSS. You should be able to get this from any of their offices. You can get them from the Department of Public Health. You can get them from the Department of Motor Vehicles. You can get them from the Department of Developmental Services, the Department of Rehabilitation Services. You can also get them from Disability Rights Connecticut, public libraries, colleges and universities, any armed forces recruiting office, many nonprofit organizations, and if you'd prefer to get it online, you can click the link when we send out the slides to get it from the Secretary of State's website.
So there is something known as Election Day registration. We here at Keep the Promise Coalition, do not suggest you do this. It is always best to register to vote as soon as possible. So, Election Day registration does not happen at your polling place, which is where you're registered to go to vote. You will have to go to your town's Election Day registration location from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you must be there before 8 p.m. to vote. You can be in line at a regular polling place at 8 p.m. to vote, but if you haven't registered to vote on Election Day, you have to be in the Election Day registration polling place prior to 8 p.m. because you have to register first. So you can both register there and vote there because it's a process. You'll need to provide proof of identity and proof of residency. And in order to find your Election Day registration location, you can click on the link that we will provide in the slides.
So you might be wondering, where is my polling place? Where do I vote? The Secretary of State website has a web page that you can use to look up not only where you should go to vote, but also to see whether you're registered. The link is on the slide, and when you click on it, you will find a page that looks like this. You can put your town into the drop-down menu, put your last name, first name, and date of birth, and it should tell you whether you're registered and where you have to go to vote.
So, if you guys are unable to do these types of things on the computer in order to click on anything, you can always feel free to email myself or Jordan. Um, and of course, we will provide those emails for you. If you have any problems, we are more than happy to help you. So, voter ID. A driver's license or photo ID are not required to vote in Connecticut. So we just talked about needing an ID in order to register to vote. However, when you go to vote, you are not required to have an ID. When you get to the polling place, the poll worker may ask for your ID, but you are not required to have one. This has always been an argument in my household with my dad, or I should say it used to be. He would always make a big deal about this one. If you do not have an ID with you, you may simply sign an affidavit instead, or a piece of paper saying that you are who you say you are and you live at the address you're saying that you live at.
So here are some of the other things that you can use instead of a driver's license on election day. You can also use a credit card that has your name and signature. You can use an ID with your name and photograph, or you could use any document that has your name and address on it, such as a checkbook or a utility bill.
Okay. The next section, we are going to specifically discuss voters with disabilities. There are over 61 million people in the disability community across all races, genders, sexual orientations, religions, and ages. Over 38 million with people with disabilities are eligible to vote. This is close to 1 out of every 6 voters.
But voters with disabilities vote at a lower rate than voters who don't have disabilities. In fact, voters with disabilities are 2 times as likely to face barriers when voting. There are laws in 39 states that have taken the right to vote away from thousands of people with mental health conditions and intellectual disabilities.
Voters with disabilities face many barriers to voting, including inaccessible polling places, difficulty getting to the polling place, lack of access to voting by mail, which should not be an issue. We can all help you do that. Elections and poll workers who are not educated about access issues. We need to definitely do something about that for sure.
And so all of this is all the more reason that it's very important to vote. Something that some people aren't aware of is that people with disabilities have the right to vote, just like people without disabilities. This includes people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, also known as IDD. This also applies if the person has a conservator. So just because you have a guardian or a conservator does not mean that you can't vote. We'll talk more about this later. And the only time that a person is not allowed to vote is if a judge has said so.
Okay, so getting on to voting rights and the Connecticut Voters Bill of Rights. The Connecticut Voters Bill of Rights lists some of the basic voter rights laws in Connecticut. It is for people with and without disabilities. It is important that all voters know these rights.
So, because of the Connecticut Voters Bill of Rights, you all have the right to look at a sample ballot before voting. That means if you want to familiarize yourself with the candidates, if you want to know what the ballot looks like, or if you want to practice voting, then you can get a sample ballot before voting. You also have the right to get directions on how to vote using sample voting equipment. You have the right to vote if you are still in line when the polls close. So at 8 o'clock on election day, if you're still in line, you can still vote. You have the right to get help voting. This includes help with languages other than English, where and when it's required by federal and state law. And you have the right to vote for who you want to without being threatened by election officials or any other person. You are the only person who can decide how you want to vote. Holly, you are on mute.
Thank you. You also have the right to vote using equipment that correctly counts all the votes. Vote using a provisional ballot if you are registered to vote and your name is not on the voter list. This applies only to elections when there are candidates for federal office on the ballot. You have the right to be told how to restore your right to vote if you were incarcerated. You have the right to vote independently and in privacy at a polling place, regardless of physical disability. So they must make sure that you can cast your ballot in privacy. They can't just put you in the middle of a room and say, here, this is where the only place we can have you vote because it's the only accessible place. No, they have to make sure that you have privacy and when you're voting.
People with disabilities specifically also have the right to vote by mail, to get a new ballot if you make a mistake, and get disability-related accommodations, which we'll go over today. And it's a good idea to volunteer to be a poll worker. This means that you can be a good advocate for people with disabilities and their rights when voting. Poll workers in Connecticut are mostly volunteers, and not everyone, even though they're supposed to be getting educated about disability rights, not everyone always knows all that they should know. So it's a good idea to volunteer to be a poll worker so that you can be a good advocate for people with disabilities when voting.
Absentee voting. Absentee voting is safe and secure and a great way to vote if you can't go in person. And you can vote absentee for any of these reasons. You have a physical disability that prevents you from voting in person. You will be out of town on election day. You have an illness that stops you from voting in person. Your religious beliefs prevent you from voting on the day of the election. Or you're an election official and you will be volunteering at a different polling place than your own. If you are sick, but there is a risk of getting sick, for example, with COVID-19. For all these reasons, you can vote absentee ballot.
And I just want to add that last one is relatively new because of the pandemic. So you don't have to be sick yourself, but if there's a risk of getting sick, you do not have to go in and vote in person. You are eligible to get an absentee ballot for that reason. And I just wanted to put this picture in here. You might have gotten one of these mailers in your mailbox, which explains what we just went over about what would make you eligible for absentee voting. If you happen to forget what was on that last slide, you may have gotten one of these, so keep an eye out for these. And you can request an absentee ballot from the Secretary of State website. To do this, you have to first apply for an absentee ballot, and then you'll have to fill out one of these forms on the Secretary of State website, which are available in English and Spanish.
So when you request an absentee ballot, you must also put in your application in time to get it back to your town clerk's office before election day. So you should get it back to them as soon as possible. And we've included the link here to go on to the Secretary of State website to see where if you can find your town clerk's office. It's usually in the same place as town hall most of the time.
Connecticut also has a permanent absentee ballot for people with disabilities. So if you have a disability and you would like to vote using an absentee ballot for any election, you can apply for this. And after your first application is accepted, they will mail you a renewal form every year. So you don't have to seek out the absentee ballot. They will mail you a form that asks you to confirm your current address. And once you return that to them, they will get you your absentee ballot. If you don't apply for the renewal, you'll lose your permanent absentee status, but you will still be registered as a voter. So that's just a good thing to know if you would like to apply for a permanent absentee ballot.
Absentee ballot questions. Can I vote with an absentee ballot if I am in a facility, nursing home, or hospital? Yes. If 20 or more registered voters are in the facility, then the town's registrar of voters must supervise the picking up of absentee ballots, supervise the delivery of the absentee ballots to the clerk in the voter's home district.
You might also be wondering if you can vote if you have a guardian or a conservator. And like we said earlier, the answer is yes. No one under a conservatorship or guardianship can be denied the right to vote unless a probate court specifically issues an order not allowing them to vote.
Am I allowed to vote if I am living in a psychiatric hospital? The answer is yes. Any person hospitalized in a facility for people with psychiatric disabilities has the right to vote again unless a probate court has said that they cannot vote.
So we're also going to talk about the Help America Vote Act of 2002. This is a federal law which is important for the voting rights of people with disabilities. It applies to the whole country, and it requires that states provide accessible voting machines, educate election officials of the rights of people with disabilities, provide accessible polling places, and conduct outreach to people with disabilities about their voting rights.
This law says that the voter registration process must be accessible. People with disabilities can request to register in Braille, large print, or audio. We suggest that you turn in your voter registration personally yourself to the Registrar of Voters office. You can email it or bring it in person. It's probably best to bring it in person to make sure you see them receiving your registration.
So are polling places required to be accessible? As we just said, yes, polling places are required to be accessible. That means that they have to provide a barrier-free way through all of the areas that are needed to vote. That includes doorways, pathways, and corridors that you have to go through to get to the voting area. Every polling place has to provide at least 2 accessible parking spaces. But you should just be aware that in some cases, a polling place might be given an accessibility waiver from the state, which means that they don't have to follow this for one election cycle. They might do this if the problem can't be fixed in the amount of time they have before the election.
Moving to the front of the line. Under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, you can move to the front of the line if your disability requires it. Let the election officials know and ask to be moved to the front of the line. If you choose to stay in line, the election officials cannot make you move to the front of the line because you have a disability. I personally did not know this, and I have had 2 panic and anxiety attacks during trying to vote, and I had to leave and not be able to vote. Had I known this was the case, I would have been able to cast my ballot, but I was not able to.
Yeah. And I want to add to that, that if your disability or your mental health condition means that you have a behavior that you think it would be better for you if you jump to the front of the line, you can do that. So how do I vote to begin with? Well, in Connecticut, you can vote using either a manual paper ballot or you could use a computer. I'll go over the manual ballot first. It's just the normal paper ballot that I'm sure many of you are used to seeing. It has the names of the candidates, and sometimes it will have referendum questions, along with a marker for filling in the circles next to your choices. When you're done, you put the ballot into the counting machine, which counts the votes.
How do I vote? Continued. You can also vote using a computer and headphones. You can vote using a keypad or by listening to spoken directions. This option may be good for people with disabilities seeing, people who prefer to hear prompts, including those who have trouble reading and people with learning disabilities. If you need accommodations, it's a good idea to call your registrar of voters ahead of time because poll workers are volunteers and some may not know what accommodations you're entitled to, and maybe they'd have to be prepared ahead of time, even though the law says not, but that unfortunately is still the case.
So can you get help casting your ballot? The answer is yes. If you need help to vote because of your disability, or you cannot write or read the ballot, you can get help from any person you want, except for your boss from your place of work, a person who represents your boss, an officer or someone who works for your union, or a candidate on the ballot, unless that candidate is a member of your immediate family.
Curbside voting. Voters who are not able to enter a polling place on the day of an election due to a disability or illness can vote from their car. It is best to call the registrar of voters before you arrive. They can make sure that people are able to come out when you get there. However, curbside voting is not a replacement for accessible polling places and should be used on rare occasions.
And no one can force you to use curbside voting if you would rather not. Can my right to vote be questioned? Yes, it can, but only for very limited reasons. Poll workers can't stop a person from voting based on their idea about the person's disability. They can only question a person's right to vote based on their identity, their loss of voting rights due to a felony, or their residency.
What if I have a health crisis before I vote? There are emergency ballots that are available to people who have health crises within 6 days of an election, a primary, or a referendum. You can contact your town clerk's office to request an emergency ballot.
So I just wanted to mention that there are some other resources that go a little bit more in depth about what we've talked about today. If you have any questions that we are not able to answer by the end of this presentation. And some of those resources are made by other organizations such as Rev Up and Disability Rights Connecticut. I also know that Common Cause Connecticut and Everyday Democracy are both here. I believe I've seen from them plenty to do with voting, which we can share as well after this presentation.
So in this election, who are the candidates and who can I vote for? So Jordan, next slide. Who can I vote for in this election? This year, US Congressperson. Connecticut has 5 congressional seats. Your US Senator. Senator Blumenthal's seat is up for election. We can vote for the governor of Connecticut, our state senators. All 36 state Senate seats are up for election. State representatives. All 151 state house seats are up for election. Some municipal candidates or ballot questions will be on some town and city ballots. And seats are what we call the positions that our legislators are elected to fill.
Yeah. So when you're voting on any of those seats, you're voting for candidates to fill those seats. And I also want to make people aware that this year there is a ballot question about early voting, which Connecticut does not have. If you would like for Connecticut to have early voting, then this question is probably something that you'll be interested in. This can mean that you could go in a few days early to the polling place to vote ahead of time. And that just makes it a lot easier for people who might not be able to get there on election day. And then you could also look up the candidates on your ballot using the link below, which again, we will provide these slides.
So, meeting and talking to your candidates. Once you know who is on your ballot, it's a really good idea to tell them about the issues that you care about. So, if you are a member of a clubhouse or other organization, consider holding a candidate forum with local candidates. Join candidate forums hosted by other organizations. Share your story and write letters to elected officials and people running for office. Make sure they know you live in their district.
It always helps when you tell a candidate or a legislator that you're from their district, because they know that you're a voter, and they're a voter who is going to be voting on the ballot that has their name on it. So a little bit more about candidate forums. Candidate forums are a great way to get to know the people on your ballot. And I wanted to mention that the State Independent Living Council is going to be hosting a forum on disability issues specifically on October 12th from 3 to 7 p.m. It's going to feature candidates for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and United States Senate and House of Representatives. We again put the link to register for the live broadcast in the presentation. You can also go in person, and we'll send that out after this presentation.
So there are other things you can do as well to get to know your legislators and those running for office. You can join town hall meetings hosted by legislators or people running for office. Ask questions about issues that are important to you or people you care about living with mental health or substance use challenges and the disability community in general. You can post on social media about issues that matter to you. You can use a hashtag to tag your legislators on their Twitter accounts or comment on their public Facebook pages. You can search for and then follow them on either of those social media sites. We know that a lot of times Twitter gets a lot of response from a lot of our legislators. Some of the Facebook as well, but mostly Twitter has been a good way to interact with our legislators and candidates. Um, Keep the Promise sometimes sends out pre-written letters about key priorities that you can add to and send to legislators. So please make sure each individual within the clubhouses are on the KTP or Keep the Promise email list so you can receive those letters.
So at a certain point, it's a good idea that you actually reach out to your candidates and your current legislators. If you want to tell them about issues that you're having or issues that you care about. It's important to remember that they're only human, so they might not know about every issue that you care about. They might not be familiar with all of the specifics, and it's your job as an advocate and as a voter to inform them about it. You might want to try asking them first if they know about your issue. An example that I use is, did you know that the average length of stay in Connecticut psychiatric hospitals is 3.5 years? So that's something I view as a problem. And it's a good conversation starter and a good way to make them aware of the things that you care about and want them to address if they're elected to office. It's always a good idea to connect it back to a story, especially if you have your own story. You know, it's good to use your lived experience. It shows them that this voter in my district cares a lot about this issue.
Okay, so we've heard a lot of people and our members who have gone through our trainings in the past discuss open-ended questions. And so we want to address some of that because we've heard a few differing opinions. So open-ended versus yes or no questions. So the yes or no questions can help you get a commitment from a candidate. So for example, if you're elected, will you support peer support, peer-run peer support, peer respite? So it holds them accountable to that stance. So an open-ended question gives candidates a chance to think about an issue. So, for example, what is your understanding of the challenges of people living with mental health conditions, substance use disorders, and disabilities in Connecticut? Or what would you do about the lack of funding for community-based support services? Those are the kinds of questions that I would ask. Their answer can tell you about their beliefs and ideas and how they might look at things when they would be possibly elected to office.
And just as a reminder, since we're kind of coming to the end of our time, it's a good idea to make a plan to vote. And I hope that today we answered some of the questions you might have. It's a good idea to go through this checklist and communicate if you need accommodations beforehand. So with that, I just want to open it up for any questions that people might have in the next 10 or so minutes.
Can we take the screen down so we can see everyone, Jordan?
Of course.
Come up here so he can ask your question, Brian.
I'm just asking,
Come here, Brian.
how large is the ballot? In other words, are we voting for 10 to 20 candidates or issues?
So the ballot this year, and let me go back to my slide about that so I could count them up. But the people that are going to be on the ballot this year, or the seats that you're going to be voting on, are your
Right.
U.S. Congressperson. So you'll vote for one U.S. representative. You'll vote for one U.S. senator. That is the seat that Senator Blumenthal currently has.
Right?
You can vote for the governor. You can vote for your state senator as well, and your state representative. Those two get elected every 2 years, just like your federal representative. And then depending on where you live, you'll probably have some municipal candidates, like you might have your town's
A mayor.
electman, or you might have your mayor, or some candidates for your local school board or zoning board. And then there is going to be a ballot question this year, like we mentioned, about early voting.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank
So
you for asking.
Jordan, sorry about that. Jordan, Mary asks in the chat, who are the hot candidates for mental health issues? She would like to make sure that she is voting for them. Thank you.
So I think that is kind of the purpose of this, the last part of the presentation, which is about talking to candidates and candidate forums and getting to know who's on your ballot. We, as Keep the Promise Coalition, don't like to and can't really tell you who to vote for. But by asking your candidates some questions and reaching out about the issues that you care about, that's a really good way to get a sense of who's going to support mental health in the legislature. And remember, they want your vote, so they want to hear from you, and they want you to tell them what you care about. Are there other questions?
I have one. I just wanted to make sure that that everyone's kind of clear with it, because I think some of my members were confused when you said they're like all of the state representatives and candidates are going to be voted or going to be on the ballot this year. But it is, you're only going to vote for the ones that are like would be in your district. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's why you're only going to be voting for the ones that are running in your district. So you're not going to have to know 100 candidates and figure out which one you want. And so what Common Ground's going to do is I'm going to go through, especially for the areas that are like in the greater Hartford, East Hartford area, we're going to look at some of those candidates and see where they stand so that you can make you can, look up on their websites, see what they have to say. And that way you can decide the best by being informed, and being an informed voter is very important, so that you're making the right choice for you and the people you know and care about. And that's what's more important. It's just as important to be informed as it is to vote. And the
So,
other thing that I wanted to say,
Diana,
Yeah.
hold on, before, can you just slow down a little bit so that the ASL interpreter can go a little bit slower for her? That's why we go as slow as we do, so we don't burn out the poor
so
interpreters.
sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm
just-
pretty passionate
No
about
worries,
things.
I got it.
We
I got
know,
it, it's okay.
We know. Okay, just wanted to make sure you were all right, Beth. You're welcome. You're welcome.
So the other thing that what we're going to do here is we're going to be making a Voters Day party. So I'm going to be going back and forth to people, to the polling place locations, and have pizza here and things like that, so we can all support each other in their rights to vote. However, I do want to say that just like Common Ground moved this year, if you guys have moved since the last time you actually voted, you're going to need to update your voters registration. Now, I know some of you I've already done that with, and but it's very easy. It's an online thing. It's very easy as long as you have some kind of a Connecticut ID card. And if you don't, we can register you all over again. It's pretty easy to be done online. Okay.
Yeah.
So you just need to get some help, or, just pull me aside, put your name up on the whiteboard that you need to see me. I'll be happy to get this done, because we have just about a month before Election Day. And we've got a lot of work to do to make sure we know who we're voting for, and that you are registered in the right district now that you're living there, and you've updated your registration if you've moved.
And that's a great point, Diana. And we could, any questions that you guys have over there, I think we're coming over next week to see you guys, so we could talk about it then too. I just wanted to answer one more question from Bridge House about, can you explain our rights at voting places for individuals with mental health disabilities? Thanks. And I will try to do that quickly in the limited amount of time that we have left. So if I'm just going to review again, and this is, I believe, if you choose not to vote using an absentee ballot and you go in person, which remember, an absentee ballot is an option. It's a good and safe, secure way to vote. But if you go in person, you have certain rights as well, specifically for people with disabilities. Let me take a look back through the slides because there's a lot. So you have the right to vote independently and in privacy in your polling place, regardless of your disability. You also have the right to hop to the front of the line because of your disability. If you, for example, have anxiety or panic attacks and you would like to vote, but don't want to, you might get nervous or anxious waiting in line, you can do that. Or if you have some sort of behavior related to your disability that makes it a little inconvenient to stay in line, you can jump to the front of the line. You could also get a new ballot if you make a mistake. That's something you're entitled to. And there are certain disability related accommodations that you can have besides those. Let me just remind myself of some of the other ones.
So please, whatever your mental health or physical disability is, please know that there are laws in place to protect you and to make sure that any polling place is accessible to you or you get the accommodations that you need. So if there's anything that you need an accommodation for, you need to get it, period.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you need to reach out to either us at KTP, and then we'll connect you to any other organizations such as Disability Rights Connecticut. But every registrar of voters should know the law and should know that you are entitled to these accommodations.
Yeah. And you're also entitled to be able to register to vote in Braille, in large print, and in audio. Same thing if you're not a native English speaker, you can get a registration in your own language. Polling places are required to be accessible. Your individual polling place might not be, but they can't be for more than one election cycle. That's just if they get a special waiver because they can't fix that problem before the election. We already covered moving to the front of the line. And remember, you can vote using audio and a computer if you want. We'll send out some more documents that have information on how to use that system. And you can get help casting your ballot as well. As long as it can be from anyone that you want, as long as it's not your boss or someone who represents your boss or someone who represents your union or a candidate on that ballot. You also have the right to vote at the curbside, so that you don't have to get out of your car. This is supposed to be a rare thing because polling places are supposed to be accessible, but it might be useful for you to know. And again, it's a good idea to make sure and call ahead with your registrar of voters so that they know that they should prepare to accommodate you. And those are what we covered today. We're a little bit over time, so I think we're gonna get wrapped up soon, but I do want to just say thank you to a few people in particular. Siobhan Morgan has done a terrific job at kind of
Thank
helping
you.
us make sure that this presentation was on base, as well as we got some resources from Lynn Ide at Universal Healthcare Foundation, as well as the Rev Up campaign. And I do want to acknowledge our funders for this project once again. Hartford
Mike's here
Foundation.
in the office. So I'm on mute.
Hi, Siobhan. Yeah, so I do want to acknowledge our funders one more time. The Connecticut Council on Developmental Disabilities and Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, who gave us a grant through their Catalyst Endowment Fund. Like I said, a lot of this is going to be sent out via email. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And Holly had put our emails in the chat a while ago. Also, please remember to fill out our survey, which should pop up at the end of this. And thank you to our interpreters.
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you. If I'm doing that properly, thank you. And if you need it in Spanish, if you need the slides in Spanish, please email us as well. Although Maria, I know that you need it in Spanish. Yuri, you need it in Spanish as well? Okay, we will note that. I'll put that in the chat notes. Needs Spanish. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys. Have a great day. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Take care.